Ambassador Veilthax pressed her four-fingered hand against the cold viewport of the research vessel as Earth came into view for the first time in 12,000 years. She had spent her entire career studying dead civilizations and forgotten species, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The blue planet hung in the darkness like a jewel that the galaxy had tried very hard to forget. Ambassador, we are receiving automated warnings from the Orbital Defense Network. Her science officer reported from across the bridge. What do they say? The same message repeating in 17 different languages, including our own. He answered with visible confusion on his scaled face. It says that entry is forbidden and that trespassers will face consequences beyond their understanding. Veilthax made a sound that among the Karishi indicated dismissal of foolish concerns. Those satellites have been orbiting for 12 millennia without maintenance, she said. They are relics, nothing more. She turned to face her crew of 37 researchers who had volunteered for this mission despite the Concordat Council expressing serious reservations about disturbing the quarantine zone. The Galactic Concordat had ruled these stars for longer than most species could remember. And all that time, the Sol system had remained untouched and unstudied. Humanity was a ghost story that elder species told their young ones. Once there was a species called humans, the stories would begin, and they burned so bright that they consumed themselves in less than 50,000 years. Veilthax had never believed those stories. She was a scientist, and scientists required evidence. Take us through the defense perimeter, she commanded. The ship moved forward, and the ancient satellites tracked their approach, but did not fire. Veilthax allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. Fear had kept the galaxy away from this system for far too long, and fear was the enemy of knowledge. As they entered orbit around Earth, she noticed something strange. The planet was not dead. From space she could see vast forests covering continents that her historical records showed should have been barren wastelands. She could see oceans that sparkled with impossible clarity, and she could see cities, not ruins, but actual cities preserved under shimmering domes of energy that her instruments could not identify or explain. This is not possible. Her science officer whispered, "Scan everything." Veilthax ordered as her hearts began to beat faster with excitement. I want data on every structure and every energy signature and every molecule of that atmosphere. The scans revealed impossibilities. The city showed no signs of decay despite 12,000 years of abandonment. The energy domes drew power from sources her equipment could not locate, and the atmosphere was cleaner than any inhabited world in the Concordat. Ambassador, there is something else. Our communications officer called out with a tremor in her voice. We are receiving a transmission from the surface. From whom? Unknown, but it is not automated like the satellite warnings, she said. It appears to be a direct response to our arrival. Play it. The bridge fell silent as a voice filled the air. It spoke in perfect Kirishi, which should have been impossible since humanity had vanished long before the Kirishi achieved spaceflight. Welcome, travelers, the voice said with a tone that carried neither hostility nor warmth. You have found what remains of our home, but we ask that you do not linger here, for this place is not ready for visitors, and neither are we. Veilthax felt her scales tighten against her skin. Respond to them, she ordered. Tell them we come in peace, and we only wish to study their world for scientific purposes. A moment of silence followed her transmission. Then the voice returned. We know why you have come. Ambassador Veilthax of the Karishi Dominion, it said, and she felt ice form in her chest at the sound of her own name. We know that your Concordat needs the minerals that rest beneath our mountains, and we know that your council believes us to be extinct. How do you know my name? We have watched the galaxy for a very long time, the voice answered. We have seen empires rise and fall while we waited in the spaces between moments, and we have hoped that one day we might return to find a universe ready to receive us. Veilthax struggled to process what she was hearing. You are human, she said. We are what humanity became. the voice corrected gently. "And we are not ready to explain what that means. But we will offer you this warning because you seem to be a being of curiosity rather than malice." "What warning?" "Do not take anything from this world," the voice said with sudden weight. "Do not copy our data or sample our soil or photograph our monuments, because if you do, then others will follow and others will want more, and we will be forced to respond to protect what we have built. I am a scientist." Velthax protested. "I cannot simply leave without evidence of what I have found here." "Then we ask only that you consider the consequences carefully," the voice said. "For 12,000 years we have chosen isolation and peace, but we remember what it was to be a young species fighting for survival in a hostile galaxy, and we remember the lengths to which we were willing to go." The transmission ended. Velthax stood in the center of her bridge, surrounded by frightened officers who looked to her for guidance. She thought about the warning. She thought about the impossible cities and the unknown technology, and the voice that knew her name before she spoke it. And then she thought about the Concordat Council and the 17 elder species who had spent millennia believing that humanity was safely dead. "Begin collecting samples," she ordered quietly. "Ambassador, are you certain that is wise?" her science officer asked. "The council needs to know what I have found here," Velthax answered. "Knowledge cannot be dangerous if it is shared with those who can use it responsibly." She believed those words when she spoke them. She would spend the rest of her life wishing she had been wise enough to doubt them. The ship descended toward Earth, and Velthax watched the ancient human cities grow larger in her viewport. In one of those cities, a monument stood in a central plaza, bearing words in 100 alien languages that her scanners captured perfectly. "We will return when we are ready," the monument declared. "Do not follow." She added the image to her report without understanding its weight. Somewhere in the spaces between moments, something ancient and patient felt her transgression and began the slow process of awakening. The galaxy had made its first mistake in 12,000 years. It would not be the last. The silence breaks. 6 months after Ambassador Velthax returned from Earth, the galaxy began to experience phenomena that no one could explain. It started small, with ancient human satellites that had drifted silent for millennia suddenly powering on and broadcasting signals that no one could decode. Then the derelict ships appeared, colony vessels that humanity had launched in the final years. Before their disappearance, emerged from the darkness at the edges of known space with their navigation systems active and their cargo holds mysteriously empty. The Concordat Council convened an emergency session on the capital world of Thesser Prime, where representatives of all 17 elder species gathered to discuss what many were calling the greatest crisis in galactic history. High Commander Drox of the Vorthani Hegemony stood before the assembled delegates with his massive frame casting shadows across the speaking platform. The Vorthani were the military arm of the Concordat, and Drox had spent his entire career preparing for threats that never materialized. Now he finally had an enemy to fight. The evidence is clear, Drox declared with his deep voice resonating through the chamber. Ambassador Velthax triggered an automated defense system when she violated the quarantine zone, and now that system is activating weapons that humanity left behind. We do not know that these are weapons. A delegate from the Mallory Collective interjected with her crystalline form flickering with doubt. What else could they be? Drox demanded. Ghost ships appearing without crews and satellites broadcasting encrypted signals and strange energy. Readings from a dozen abandoned human outposts across the galaxy. Perhaps they are simply machines following old programming, the Mallory suggested. And perhaps they are the vanguard of an army that has waited 12,000 years to destroy us, Drox countered. I will not gamble the safety of 17 species on optimistic assumptions. He turned to address the full council with fire burning in his 4 eyes. I propose a preemptive strike against the Sol system, he announced. We will destroy Earth and every human relic before this ghost army can fully activate. The chamber erupted in argument as delegates shouted over each other in a dozen different languages. Ambassador Veilthax sat in the visitor gallery watching the chaos she had caused unfold below her. She had been stripped of her diplomatic credentials after returning from Earth and was now under investigation for recklessly endangering galactic security. Part of her wanted to stand and defend herself, but another part wondered if Drox might be right. What if she had awakened something terrible? In a small laboratory on the far side of Desser Prime, a young Karishi technician named Sylveth was asking herself a very different question. She had been assigned to analyze the signals from the reactivated human satellites, and after 6 months of work, she had finally cracked a portion of the encryption. What she found made her scales turn pale with shock. This is not a weapon. Activation code, she whispered to herself as she stared at her translation. The signal was a question broadcast on repeat across every frequency that the human satellites could reach. "Are you the ones who came to our home?" the message asked. "Are you ready?" To speak, Sylveth rushed to contact her superiors, but found that all communications to the council chamber had been restricted for the duration of the emergency session. She tried to reach Ambassador Veilthax directly, but discovered that the disgraced diplomat was under surveillance and could not receive outside messages. Growing desperate, she attempted to submit her findings through official channels only to watch her report disappear into a bureaucratic void that would take weeks to navigate. Meanwhile, in the council chamber, High Commander Drox was winning his argument. "The longer we wait, the stronger the human machines become," he insisted. "Every day we debate is a day we give them to prepare. And if we are wrong," the Mallory delegate asked, "what if we attack and discover that humanity is not as dead as we believed?" Drox made a sound that among the Vorthani indicated contempt. "Then we will finish what time started," he said. "The humans were dangerous even when they were primitive. And if any of them have survived, then we cannot allow them to threaten the peace we have built." The vote was called, and the council authorized military action by a margin of 11-6. Sylveth learned of the decision through a news broadcast that interrupted her frantic attempts to contact anyone who would listen. "The combined Concordat fleet will depart for the Sol system within 72 hours. The announcer reported. High Commander Drox has promised a swift and decisive resolution to the human crisis. Sylveth felt despair wash over her as she realized that no one was going to hear her warning in time. 4,000 warships representing every elder species in the galaxy would arrive at Earth, prepared for battle, and they would be answering a question with violence when all humanity wanted was to talk. She made one final attempt to reach someone who might listen by recording a message and transmitting it on the same frequency that the human satellites were using. "My name is Sylveth of the Karishi Dominion," she said with her voice shaking. "I have decoded your transmission, and I understand that you want to communicate peacefully, but I cannot stop what is coming." She paused as tears formed in her eyes. "I am sorry," she continued. "I am so sorry for what my people are about to do." Then she ended the transmission and sat alone in her laboratory, waiting for a response that she did not expect to receive. 3 days later, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history departed for Earth. Ambassador Veilthax watched the ships leave from her window on Desser Prime, knowing that she was responsible for whatever happened next. Sylveth continued her work in isolation, hoping against hope that someone somewhere was listening, and in the spaces between moments where humanity had spent 12,000 years becoming something new, a decision was being made. The question had been asked, and the answer was coming. It was not the answer that humanity had hoped for, but it was the answer they had prepared for since the day they chose to leave the galaxy behind. The mistake, the combined Concordat fleet, emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system and found Earth waiting for them exactly as Ambassador Veilthax had described: blue oceans and green continents and shimmering domes. over ancient cities that should have crumbled to dust millennia ago. High Commander. Drox stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vorthani Dominance, surrounded by tactical displays showing the positions of all 4,000 ships under his command. Scan for defensive installations, he ordered. Commander, we are detecting only the same automated satellites that Ambassador Veilfax reported. His sensor officer replied. They do not appear to be armed. And the ghost ships that have been appearing across the galaxy. No sign of them here, Commander. Drox felt a flicker of doubt cross his mind, but he crushed it beneath the weight of his certainty. He had not brought the largest fleet in galactic history to this dead system, just to turn around and go home. Prepare all weapons, he commanded. We will begin with the orbital defense network and then proceed to planetary bombardment. Commander, his communications officer interrupted with confusion in her voice. We are receiving a transmission from the third planet. From Earth. Yes, Commander, and it is not automated, she said. It appears to be a direct response to our arrival. Drox felt his 4 hearts begin to beat faster. Put it through. The main view screen flickered and then displayed an image that made every officer on the bridge freeze in shock. Human was looking at them. Not a recording or a hologram, but a living, breathing human with dark skin and silver hair and eyes that held more years than any mortal being should possess. Greetings, travelers, the human said in perfect Vorthani. My name is not important, but you may call me the Speaker if you require a designation. You are human, Drox said with his voice barely steady. I'm what humanity became, the Speaker replied with the same words that Veilfax had reported hearing 6 months ago. I have come to ask you a simple question before you proceed with your attack. We are not here to answer questions, Drox growled. We are here to eliminate a threat to galactic security. I understand, the Speaker said with sadness in their ancient eyes. Your fear is not unreasonable given what you believe about us, but I must ask my question regardless. Ask then, are you willing to speak with us? The Speaker asked, are you willing to lower your weapons and send a single unarmed vessel to meet with me so that we might discuss the future without violence? Drox hesitated for only a moment. No, he said. The Speaker closed their eyes, and when they opened them again, the sadness had deepened into something that looked almost like grief. Then I must inform you that you are making a mistake, they said. Not because we will destroy you, for we have no desire for destruction, but because you are choosing fear when you could choose understanding. Enough of this. Drox snarled as he turned to his weapons officer. Destroy that transmission source. Targeting now, Commander. The fleet opened fire with enough concentrated energy to crack a continent. The beams crossed the distance to Earth in less than a second and struck the location of the human transmission with perfect accuracy and hit nothing. The Speaker was simply not there when the weapons arrived. Then they were there again, standing in the same position, with the same sad expression as, if the attack had never happened, you were warned, the Speaker said, with their voice now carrying a weight that pressed against the minds of every being in the fleet. You were asked, and you chose violence. How is this possible? Drox demanded as fear finally began to crack through his certainty. 12,000 years ago, humanity was a young species struggling to take its first steps among the stars. The Speaker explained. We were curious and ambitious, and yes, we were dangerous in the way that all young things are dangerous. The view screen shifted to show images of ancient Earth with primitive rockets launching toward a sky full of possibility. The elder species of that era saw our potential, and they were afraid. The Speaker continued. So they sabotaged our first colony ship and killed 40,000 of our people and made it look like an accident. Drox felt his scales grow cold. That cannot be true. It is true, Commander, and we have evidence that we will share with the galaxy when this is over. The Speaker said, but that is not why I tell you this story now. The images changed again to show humanity retreating from the stars and turning inward and eventually vanishing from the galaxy entirely. We could have sought revenge, the Speaker said. We could have built weapons and returned to destroy those who wronged us, but instead, we chose a different path. What path? We chose to become worthy of the stars. The speaker answered, we spent 12,000 years in a place where time flows differently, learning and growing, and transcending the limitations that made us dangerous. The speakers spread their hands, and suddenly, every view screen on every ship in the fleet showed the same image: humanity in its current form, beings of light and thought and impossible complexity, who existed in dimensions that the elder species could not perceive, let alone comprehend. We returned because we hoped the galaxy had changed. The speaker said, we sent our question because we wanted to believe that peace was possible. And now, Drux asked with his voice barely a whisper, now we must respond to your attack. The speaker said, but we will not destroy you because destruction is the way of the species we used to be. The speaker raised one hand and every ship in the fleet stopped moving, not damaged or disabled, but frozen in time itself, with crews conscious and aware, but unable to move or speak or even blink. You will watch, the speaker said as their voice echoed in the minds of 4 million soldiers. You will see what humanity has become, and you will understand why you should have chosen differently. The frozen fleet hung in space around Earth as humanity began to reveal the truth of what 12,000 years of evolution had created. And across the galaxy, the consequences of the Concordat's mistake began to unfold. Ondesser Prime Ambassador Veilthax collapsed as visions of impossible beauty and terrible power flooded her mind. In her laboratory, Sylveth received a response to the message she had sent 3 days ago. We heard you, little one. The message said, and we thank you for trying. The galaxy would never be the same, but whether that change would bring salvation or destruction remained to be seen. The reckoning. The speaker appeared on every inhabited world in the galaxy simultaneously, which should have been impossible. But humanity had long since stopped being bound by the limitations of conventional physics. On Desser Prime, the Council chamber fell silent as the human emissary materialized in the center of the speaking platform on 100 colony worlds. Billions of beings stopped what they were doing and stared at screens that had been hijacked to display the same message. On a small research station at the edge of known space, Sylveth watched with tears streaming down her scaled face as the being she had tried so desperately to warn finally spoke to the galaxy, citizens of the Concordat. The speaker began with their voice calm and measured, despite the weight of what they were about to reveal. My name is not important, but what I have to tell you is. The speaker gestured, and images appeared in the air around them showing the frozen fleet hanging motionless in orbit around Earth. 12 hours ago, your military forces attacked our homeworld. The speaker continued. 4,000 ships carrying 4 million soldiers fired upon us without provocation and without mercy. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the council chamber. We have not destroyed them, the speaker said. We have simply paused them in time so that they might witness the truth alongside the rest of you. What truth? Demanded Councillor Morthax of the Vorthani delegation, with anger burning in his voice. What lies do you intend to spread? Not lies, Councillor, but rather the confession that your ancestors never had the courage to make. The speaker waved their hand again, and new images appeared showing events from 12,000 years ago. A human colony ship called the Horizon, carrying 40,000 settlers toward a new world full of hope and dreams for the future. A Vorthani warship hiding in the shadow of an asteroid, waiting with weapons armed and targeting systems locked. The moment of impact as the colony ship exploded and 40,000 lives ended in fire and silence. This is fabrication. Councillor Morthax shouted. Human propaganda designed to justify their aggression. Is it? The speaker asked with quiet certainty. Then perhaps you can explain why the debris field of the Horizon contains Vorthani weapon signatures that your own scientists confirmed when they secretly studied the site 3,000 years ago. The speaker produced a data crystal. and placed it on the speaking platform. This contains all evidence of the crime committed against humanity by the species that now call themselves the Galactic Concordat. They said, navigation logs from the Vorthani warship and communications between the attackers and their government, and the scientific analysis that your predecessors buried to hide their guilt. Councillor Morthax fell silent as the color drained from his face. We do not share this to justify revenge. The speaker continued, we share it because the galaxy deserved to know the foundation upon which your alliance was built. The images shifted to show the aftermath of the attack, humanity grieving and raging and tearing itself apart as different factions blamed each other for the disaster that they did not know had been inflicted from outside. The wars that followed, and the billions more who died, and the slow retreat from the stars as humanity lost faith in its own future. Your ancestors watched us suffer. The speaker said, they watched us destroy ourselves, and they felt relief because they believed that a dangerous rival had been eliminated. And then you vanished. Ambassador Veilthax said from the visitor gallery where she had been watching in stunned silence. Where did you go? The speaker turned to face her with something that might have been respect in their ancient eyes. We went somewhere else, Ambassador, they answered. A place between dimensions where time flows at a different rate and where we could grow without interference for 12,000 years. For 12,000 of your years. The speaker corrected gently. For us, it was much, much longer. The speaker spread their hands and allowed a fraction of their true nature to become visible. Light and mathematics and patterns of thought, too complex for mortal minds to fully comprehend. We became something new, Ambassador. They said, something that your scientists would call transcendent and your philosophers would call divine and your poets would simply call beautiful. And now you have returned to punish us. Councillor Morthax said with his voice hollow with defeat. No, Councillor, we have returned to offer you a choice. The speaker let their form settle back into something that resembled a human being. You can acknowledge the crime that was committed against us. They said, you can confess publicly and accept restructuring under human oversight while we work together to build something better than the Alliance. You have now. And if we refuse, then we will release the frozen fleet and the truth and let your Concordat collapse under the weight of its own lies. The speaker answered, we will not destroy you, but we will not protect you from each other either. The council chamber erupted in chaos as delegates shouted accusations and denials at each other. Some demanded immediate surrender while others called for continued resistance, and still others simply stared at the evidence of their ancestors' crimes with horror in their eyes. Ambassador Veilthax watched the chaos and felt something shift inside her heart. She had started this crisis by ignoring a warning that she should have heeded. She had brought samples and data from Earth and given the council the excuse they needed to send their fleet, but she could also end it. She stood and walked to the speaking platform where the speaker waited with patient eyes that seemed to see through her scales and into her soul. I do not have the authority to speak for the Concordat, Veilthax said, but I can speak for myself. She turned to face the chamber and the billions watching across the galaxy. I confess, she said with her voice clear and strong, not to the crime of 12,000 years ago, which I did not commit, but to the crime of 6 months ago when I ignored a warning and brought this crisis upon us. She bowed her head. And on behalf of the Koreshi Dominion, I acknowledge that the evidence presented by humanity is true. She continued, I do not know what my ancestors knew or when they knew it, but I know that lies cannot be the foundation of peace. The chamber fell silent. The speaker smiled, and it was the first genuine expression of warmth that any being in the galaxy had seen from humanity in 12,000 years. Thank you, Ambassador, they said. That took courage. It took less courage than staying silent. Veilthax answered one by one. Other delegates began to rise and add their voices to hers. Not all of them, but enough. enough to show that the Concordat could change enough to give humanity a reason to believe that their return might lead to something other than destruction. The speaker watched the confessions accumulate and felt hope stir in the vast collective consciousness of transcendent humanity. Perhaps they had been right to wait. Perhaps the galaxy was finally ready. The reckoning had begun, but it would not end in fire. It would end in truth. The return 1 year had passed since the day humanity revealed itself to the galaxy, and everything had changed. The Galactic Concordat was no more dissolved by unanimous vote of its member species after the truth of its founding crime became impossible to deny. In its place rose the Terran Concord, a new alliance built on principles that the old order had never truly embraced. Transparency instead of secrecy, cooperation instead of domination, truth instead of comfortable lies. Ambassador Veilthax stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching human ships arrive for the first anniversary celebration of the new alliance. They were not warships. They had never been warships. Every vessel that humanity sent into Concordat space carried gifts and knowledge and invitations to visit Earth and see what 12,000 years of evolution had created. "You seem troubled, Ambassador," a familiar voice said from behind her. She turned to find the speaker standing there with their silver hair catching the light of distant stars. "I am remembering," Veilthax answered. "1 year ago I stood on a different observation deck watching your fleet freeze our armada in time, and I was certain that we were all going to die. And now I watch your ships bring medicine that cures diseases we thought incurable, and technology that could end scarcity across the galaxy. And I wonder if any of us deserve such generosity." The speaker moved to stand beside her at the viewport. "You are wondering why we forgave you?" They said, "Yes. The answer is simpler than you might expect, Ambassador." The speaker replied, "We forgave you because we remembered what it was like to be young and afraid and capable of terrible mistakes." They gestured toward the human ships descending toward the station. 12,000 years ago, humanity was not so different from the species that attacked us. They continued, "We were aggressive and territorial, and we might have done the same thing to a rival if we had possessed the power. But you did not." "We did not because we never had the chance," the speaker acknowledged. "Our enemies struck first, and in doing so, they gave us a gift that they never intended." "What gift?" "Time to become better," the speaker answered. "Time to look at ourselves honestly and decide what kind of species we wanted to be." Veilthax considered this as she watched a human medical ship dock with the station. Inside that ship were cures for 17 different diseases that had plagued Concordat species for millennia, along with teams of human doctors, ready to train local physicians in techniques that seemed like magic. "You could have conquered us," she said. "With the power you demonstrated at the Battle of Sol, you could have made yourselves masters of the galaxy." "Yes, we could have." "Why did you choose differently?" The speaker turned to face her with those ancient eyes that had seen more years than the stars themselves. "Because conquest is what we were, Ambassador," they said. "And we spent 12,000 years becoming something else." A door opened behind them and Sylveth entered the observation deck wearing the uniform of the first non-human liaison to the Terran Concord, the young technician who had decoded humanity's message and tried so desperately to prevent the attack, had become one of the most important diplomats in the new alliance. "Ambassador speaker," she said with a respectful bow. High Commander Drox has completed his sentence. Veilthax felt her scales tighten at the mention of that name. After the fleet was released and the truth revealed, Drox had been brought before a human tribunal, not for attacking them but for suppressing Sylveth's decoded message and choosing war when peace was offered. His sentence had been simple: 1 year on Earth, living among humans and learning who they had become. "How is he?" the speaker asked. "Changed," Sylveth answered with something complicated in her voice. "He asked me to deliver a message to the ambassador. What message? He said that he finally understands why you confessed, Sylveth said to Veilthax. And he wanted you to know that he is sorry for calling you a traitor. Veilthax felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized was still tight. Tell him that I accept his apology, she said, and tell him that understanding is the first step toward wisdom. Sylveth nodded and departed to carry the message. The speaker watched her go with visible pride. She will be remarkable, they said. In a few centuries, she may be the one who finally bridges the gap between our kinds completely. A few centuries. Did we not mention? The speaker asked with a hint of amusement. The treatments we have been providing to Concordat species do not merely cure disease. Veilthax felt her heart skip a beat. How long? Long enough, Ambassador. The speaker answered. Long enough to see what the galaxy becomes when fear is no longer its guiding principle. They stood together in silence, watching the ships arrive as the celebration began throughout the station, somewhere in the crowd. Below, Drox was meeting with the humans who had shown him mercy when he deserved punishment. Somewhere in the diplomatic wing, Sylveth was drafting proposals that would reshape the relationship between species for millennia to come, and somewhere in the vast collective consciousness of transcended humanity, a decision was being made to share one more secret with the beings they had chosen to forgive. The monument on Earth had been updated one final time. Veilthax had received an image of it that morning from the speaker below. The original warning that she had ignored 1 year ago, a new inscription had been added. Thank you for waking us, it said. We forgot how much we missed the stars. She pulled the image up on her personal display and stared at it as the celebration swirled around her. Speaker, she said quietly, may I ask one more question? Of course. Do you ever regret it? She asked. The 12,000 years of isolation and the choice to forgive instead of destroy, and all the pain that led to this moment. The speaker considered her question with the patience of a being who had learned to measure time in eons, rather than years. No, Ambassador. They finally answered. Because every moment of that pain led us here to this station, surrounded by species who chose truth over fear. They gestured toward the viewport where the last of the human ships was completing its approach. We spent 12,000 years becoming worthy of the stars, they said. And now we have returned to find that the stars were waiting for us all along. Veilthax looked up at the darkness between the lights and felt something she had not experienced since childhood. Wonder. Welcome home? She whispered. The speaker smiled. Thank you, Ambassador, they said. It is good to be back. Above them, the human ships settled into their berths carrying gifts and knowledge and hope for a galaxy that had finally learned the cost of fear. The return was complete, and this time humanity would not be leaving again.